"Hey, wake up, vagrant! You can't sleep here!" The sharp kick to his ribs jolted Sergeant Arthur Bishop awake. Before he could orient himself, a blinding pain shot through his body, every muscle spasming. The young police officer stood over him, taser still crackling, a smirk on his face. "That got your attention, huh?" Arthur, 72, homeless and huddled behind a diner for warmth, gasped for breath, the familiar scent of ozone filling his nostrils. 6 minutes later, the diner's early morning peace was shattered by the disciplined arrival of heavy military vehicles, sealing off the entire block with chilling efficiency. If you believe those who serve deserve our protection, not persecution, type honor below. Arthur Bishop knew the cold embrace of forgotten corners. After 30 years in the Army, specializing in reconnaissance and long-range surveillance, mostly in places his country preferred not to acknowledge, civilian life had proven a disorienting, unwelcoming landscape. His small pension and disability for service-connected injuries barely kept pace with rising costs, especially after his wife, Martha, passed from a swift, aggressive cancer that depleted their savings. One misstep, one unexpected medical bill, and the tightrope had snapped. Now, at 72, his home was a carefully chosen alcove behind Rosie's 24-hour diner, a spot that offered some protection from the wind and the faint, comforting smell of frying bacon in the early mornings. He kept his few belongings in a battered duffel bag, a worn Bible, a spare set of socks, a faded photo of Martha, and his discharge papers carefully wrapped in plastic. He never panhandled, never caused trouble. He just tried to remain invisible, a ghost haunting the periphery of a society that had largely forgotten men like him. He'd been a soldier his whole adult life, trained to endure hardship with stoic resilience. But this particular hardship, the constant gnawing hunger and the soul-crushing invisibility of homelessness, was a different kind of enemy, one without a clear objective or an honorable fight. He'd found this spot behind Rosie's a few weeks ago. It was relatively safe, and Rosie, a kind woman who'd seen her share of hard-luck stories, sometimes left out a container of leftover soup or a day-old donut near the bins before closing. The pre-dawn chill was biting. Arthur had managed a few hours of fitful sleep huddled deep within his threadbare sleeping bag, his duffel bag clutched tight. He was dreaming of warmer places, of Martha's smile. When the rude awakening came, it wasn't a gentle nudge. It was a sharp, deliberate kick to his side, jolting him into painful consciousness. "Hey, you, get up. Can't sleep here." The voice was young, aggressive, filled with the self-importance of newly acquired authority. Arthur struggled to sit, up disoriented, his old joints screaming in protest. Through blurry eyes, he saw two figures silhouetted against the faint glow of the diner's back alley light. Police officers, their uniforms crisp, their expressions hard. What's wrong, officer?" Arthur managed, his voice raspy with sleep and cold. "What's wrong?" The younger officer, let's call him Miller, scoffed. "You're what's wrong. Vagrancy, loitering on private property. Pick one." His partner, older and more world-weary, "Officer." Davis hung back slightly, observing. I wasn't bothering anyone," Arthur said, trying to gather his wits. "Just trying to stay warm. Rosie, the owner, she doesn't mind." "Rosie ain't here at 4 a.m., old man," Miller snapped, taking a step closer, his hand resting on the taser holstered on his belt. "And we mind. This area's had complaints about homeless encampments. You fit the description. You got ID?" Arthur fumbled in his duffel, his hand stiff with cold. He produced his VA medical card and his driver's license. Its address now. Meaningless. Miller barely glanced at them. "VA card, huh? Lots of guys claim to be vets. Doesn't give you a free pass to sleep on the streets." He seemed to be enjoying this, the power he held over this vulnerable old man. Arthur felt a familiar weariness. He'd learned long ago that arguing with this kind of belligerent authority was usually pointless, often dangerous. "I'll move along, officer," he said quietly, beginning to gather his meager belongings. "Just give me a minute." "We don't have a minute," Miller said, his voice rising. "We want you out of here, now." He took another step, invading Arthur's personal space. "You deaf, old-timer? Or just slow?" Arthur continued to pack his sleeping bag, his movements deliberate, ignoring the taunt. This seemed to enrage Miller further. He saw it as defiance. "Resisting, are we?" Miller sneered. "Maybe a little jolt will speed you up." Before Arthur could react, before Officer Davis could intervene, even if he'd wanted to, Miller drew his taser. There was no warning, no further attempt at de-escalation. Just the bright yellow weapon, the sharp, distinctive crackle as it armed, and then a blinding, searing agony as the barb struck Arthur's chest, electricity coursing through his frail body. Arthur cried out, an involuntary sound torn from his throat as every muscle seized. He collapsed back against the brick wall, his vision swimming, the acrid smell of ozone filling his nostrils. He lay there, gasping, convulsing, the world a blur of pain and flashing lights from the taser. Miller stood over him, the taser still pointed, a look of grim satisfaction on his youthful face. "That got your attention, huh? Now, are you going up to move, or do you want another dose?" Officer Davis finally stepped forward, a flicker of unease in his eyes. "Miller, that's enough. He's an old man. He wasn't resisting." "Looked like resisting to me, Sarge," Miller retorted, though he lowered the taser slightly. "Just needed some motivation." Arthur lay on the cold ground, his body trembling uncontrollably, the pain slowly receding, leaving behind a profound, nauseating weakness. He could hear the officers talking above him, their voices distorted. He felt a deep, burning shame, not for his situation, but for the casual brutality he had just endured. He had faced enemy combatants with more respect than this. As the initial shock wore off, a different kind of cold settled in, the cold fury of a man who had dedicated his life to service only to be treated like dangerous refuse. He focused on his breathing, trying to regain control. He knew he couldn't stay there. He had to move. But before he could, he heard Officer Davis speaking into his radio, his voice flat, professional. "Dispatch, be advised. Subject detained, possible vagrancy, some minor resistance. Requesting transport for one elderly male. No medical. Assistance required. Subject is compliant now." Compliant. Arthur almost laughed, a bitter, silent sound. He was compliant because his body was still recovering from being electrocuted. As Officer Davis finished his call, Arthur, still lying on the ground, his vision slowly clearing, reached with a trembling hand into the inner pocket of his field jacket. His fingers closed around a small, smooth, metallic object, a military challenge coin, old and worn, bearing the insignia of a very specific, very discreet unit. On the reverse was an unlisted emergency contact number, reserved for dire situations connecting directly to a Joint Special Operations Liaison Office. He'd never used it in civilian life. He'd never imagined he would need to. But this felt dire. This felt like a betrayal that went beyond simple harassment. Miller was now prodding him with his boot. "Get up on your feet. Let's go." With immense effort, Arthur fumbled for his ancient ruggedized cell phone, a relic from his last active duty deployment. Miller watched him, a sneer on his face. "Calling your lawyer, Grandpa?" "Good luck with that." Arthur ignored him. His fingers, still clumsy, managed to dial the number from the coin. It connected on the first ring. A calm, professional voice, devoid of emotion, answered, "Watchtower. Identify." Arthur cleared his throat, his voice weak but steady. "Bishop, Arthur, Sergeant First Class, retired. Call sign, Nomad. Priority. Priority designation, Crimson. Officer involved incident. Unjustified use of force. Location, North Alley. Rear of Rose's Diner, corner of 5th and Elm. Requesting immediate protocol review." There was a brief pause. Then the voice came back, equally calm, but with an underlying current of something else. Readiness. "Nomad. Watchtower copies. Location confirmed. Protocol review initiated. Stand by. Assets en route." ETA, 6 minutes, The line went dead. Arthur let his hand fall, the phone slipping from his grasp. 6 minutes. He hoped he could last that long. Miller was now trying to haul him to his feet, his grip rough. "Come on, let's not keep the paddy wagon waiting." The first indication that something was amiss came not as a siren, but as a subtle shift in the pre-dawn light, a flicker of unusual reflections against the diner's grimy windows. Officer Davis, writing his report in their cruiser, looked up. Officer Miller, still trying to manhandle Arthur, paused. Then came the sound, a low, guttural rumble, not of a single police vehicle, but of multiple heavy engines approaching fast. Before either officer could fully process it, the narrow alley, entrances at both ends of the block, were simultaneously, decisively blocked by two matte-black, heavily armored tactical vehicles. Not police SWAT vans, these were something else entirely, larger, more formidable. With no visible markings except for small, discreet government plates, their bulk filled the alleyways, sealing off any escape. Doors hissed open, and figures emerged, clad in dark, non-reflective tactical gear, their movements swift, silent, and utterly professional. They didn't shout commands, they simply moved, establishing a perimeter with chilling efficiency, their presence transforming the grimy alley into a tightly controlled zone. Miller and Davis froze, their hands instinctively going to their sidearms, then hesitating as they took in the sheer number and coordinated discipline of the newcomers. These weren't local cops. These weren't even standard federal agents. This was something different. A third vehicle, a black Suburban with tinted windows, glided silently into the alley behind Rosie's, stopping directly beside where Arthur lay, still struggling to rise. The rear door opened, and a man in a severe dark suit stepped out. He was older, perhaps in his late 50s, with a lean, hard face and eyes that missed nothing. He ignored the two bewildered police officers completely, his entire focus on awe. "Arthur? Sergeant Bishop?" the man asked, his voice quiet but carrying unmistakable authority. "Colonel Wainwright, Joint Task Force Watchtower. Sent us. Are you injured, Sergeant?" Arthur, looking up at the man, managed a weak nod. "Tased, Colonel, unprovoked." Colonel Wainwright's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He knelt beside Arthur, his earlier formality replaced by a genuine concern. "Medics are inbound, Sergeant. Just hold tight." He then looked up, his gaze cold as glacial ice, fixing on Officers Miller and Davis, who were now standing frozen, their faces a mixture of confusion and dawning apprehension. "You two," Wainwright's voice was soft, but it sliced through the pre-dawn chill like a scalpel. "Identify yourselves, now." Officer Davis, the senior officer, found his voice, though it trembled slightly. "Officer Davis, Metro PD. This is Officer Miller. We were responding to a vagrancy call." "A vagrancy call," Wainwright repeated, his voice devoid of inflection. "And your response protocol for a 72-year-old man sleeping behind a diner involves an electroshock weapon?" He looked at Miller. "Officer Miller, you deployed the taser." Miller, now visibly sweating despite the cold, stammered, He was resisting, sir, non-compliant." "Resisting what, officer?" Wainwright pressed. "Resisting being kicked awake? Resisting your attempt to deprive him of his only shelter? Or perhaps resisting your manifest incompetence?" He rose to his full height, his presence dominating the narrow alley. "I have Sergeant Bishop's initial report. I have also just reviewed the body cam footage from your own department, which miraculously was already being uploaded by your dispatcher, who noted a discrepancy in your initial call. The footage, Officer Miller, shows no resistance. It shows an unprovoked assault on an elderly, unarmed man. Just then, two more figures in tactical gear appeared, these ones clearly medical personnel carrying advanced trauma kits. They immediately began attending to Arthur, their movements efficient and gentle. Colonel Wainwright turned back to the two officers. "Your sidearms. Place them on the hood of your vehicle. Now, you are both being detained pending a full federal investigation into civil rights violations, assault under color of authority, and potential elder abuse." "Federal?" Officer Davis exclaimed, his face draining of color. "On what grounds? This is a local matter." "It became a federal matter, officer," Wainwright stated icily. The moment Officer Miller deployed his taser on a retired United States Army Sergeant First Class with a distinguished 30-year service record, a man whose last active assignment involved direct support to sensitive national security operations. Sergeant Bishop is not just some vagrant. He is under the continued, albeit discreet, protective interest of certain agencies, and you gentlemen have just made yourselves a very significant problem. The two officers, under the unwavering gaze of Wainwright and the silent, imposing figures of his team, slowly, reluctantly unholstered their weapons and placed them on their cruiser. Their careers, they were beginning to realize, had just taken a very sharp, very downward turn. The arrival of the federal team, followed swiftly by a visibly agitated police chief and several internal affairs detectives, transformed the grimy alley into a hive of official activity. Arthur was carefully examined by the military medics, who confirmed that he had no lasting physical injuries from the tasing, though he was clearly shaken and suffering from exposure. Colonel Wainwright personally ensured Arthur was given warm blankets, hot coffee, and a quiet space in one of their vehicles to recover, while the bureaucratic storm raged around him. Officers Miller and Davis were formally relieved of duty by their own chief, their badges and IDs confiscated on the spot, pending the outcome of both the internal and the now inevitable federal investigation. The chief, after a very brief, very intense, and very one-sided conversation with Colonel Wainwright, looked like he had aged 10 years. He stammered apologies to Arthur, promising a full and transparent inquiry. Wainwright simply nodded, his expression unreadable. "See that you do, Chief. This department's conduct towards veterans, particularly vulnerable ones, will be under enhanced scrutiny." He then made arrangements for Arthur. "Sergeant Bishop, we have a secure room for you at a government guest house downtown. Warm bed, hot meals, medical follow-up, and a team from the VA and my own liaison office will meet you there later this morning to sort out your housing and benefit situation. Permanently. This should never have happened." Arthur, wrapped in a warm blanket, sipping coffee, looked at the colonel, a flicker of his old self returning to his eyes. "Thank you, Colonel. Didn't think anyone still remembered the old call signs." "Some call signs, Sergeant," Wainwright said quietly, "are never forgotten, especially not by those who understand their meaning. You served your country with honor. It's time your country served you with the same." As the sun began to rise, casting long shadows down the alley, the military convoy prepared to depart, taking Arthur with them. Rosie, the diner owner, had arrived for her morning shift and stood watching in stunned silence as the man she sometimes left soup for was escorted with profound respect into a black government vehicle by a stern-faced colonel. The message left. Hanging in the crisp morning air was unspoken but undeniable. Some lines, once crossed, trigger a response far beyond local jurisdiction, and some sleeping veterans are guarded by more than just threadbare blankets. Their quiet call for help can still summon a formidable force because loyalty, like honor, doesn't retire. Subscribe to Hidden Sparks if you believe that every veteran deserves dignity, respect, and swift justice when those are violated, and that sometimes the quietest alarms summon the most powerful response.